All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about taxes, but not in the way you might think. We're diving into this really fundamental conflict, these two competing ideas that have shaped taxes for, well, centuries. And we're going to see how one of those ideas is finally being torn down, triggering a massive revolution in how our entire global economy works.
So it all boils down to this one simple question. Is tax a contribution or is it a cost? Now that might sound straightforward, but believe me, the answer has these two completely different starting points, and you really have to get that difference to understand the huge changes happening in international tax right now.
Okay, so let's break this down. On one side, you've got domestic tax. The idea here is pretty simple, right? Think of an old farming village. Everyone agrees to chip in maybe a little bit of their harvest to build a big fence that protects everybody. It's a contribution, a sacrifice for the common good. We all benefit. But international tax, whoa, it started from the total opposite idea. Picture a merchant hundreds of years ago trying to get their goods to market. Every time they cross a river or go through a mountain pass, some local ruler demands a payment. That's not a contribution for the common good. It's basically protection money. It's a cost you're forced to pay just to survive and do your business.
So, that ancient mindset, that idea of tax as a cost, well, it didn't just fade away. Oh no, it survived, and it grew, and it morphed into this incredibly powerful force in our modern world.
Think about it. The traveling merchant from our story? They grew up. They became the massive, sophisticated, multinational corporation we know today. But that core philosophy, it stuck. The idea that any tax paid in a foreign country is just a business cost, something to be minimized at all costs, that never went away. And then, in the late 20th century, globalization and the digital age hit, and it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, money could move across the globe in a millisecond. This gave companies the power to engineer their finances with, ruthless efficiency. Taxes weren't a civic duty anymore. They were just another line item on a spreadsheet to be slashed. The only loyalty? To the shareholders. So, you might be asking, who wrote the rules for this global game? Well, they were built on this idea of international consensus. Sounds good, right? Like everyone got together and agreed on what's fair. But let's be real. That consensus was often heavily influenced by experts who are either working for or had deep connections to the very same giant corporations these rules were supposed to manage. So is it any surprise that the system ended up favoring the interests of big business, especially over the needs of, say, developing countries trying to collect their fair share? And this system, it absolutely created victims. At first, the biggest losers were the developing countries, the source countries. That's where all the sales were happening, but almost no tax was being paid. Why? Because the rules were ancient. They said you needed a physical presence, like an office, to be taxed. That's totally useless when a company can make billions in your country with just a website. But then, the plot twist. The whole thing got so aggressive, so out of control, that even the rich developed countries, the home countries of these giant corporations, started getting hurt. The game they helped create was starting to eat them alive.
And that's when everything changed. The dam just broke. Remember the 2008 financial crisis? Governments were desperate for money, and the public? They had zero patience left for stories about corporate games. This perfect storm of anger and need suddenly took this super technical, boring topic of international tax and shoved it right onto the front page of every newspaper.
And it all kind of crystallized around one insane number, 12,000. In a speech, President Obama pointed to this one single, pretty unremarkable office building in the Cayman Islands, a building that, on paper, was the official headquarters for 12,000 different corporations. Wow. Instantly, that one building became this powerful, easy-to-understand symbol for a system that was just completely ridiculously broken.
So you had this perfect storm, really. A 1-2-3 punch that created this unstoppable wave of change. First, you had Obama's symbol, the Cayman building, which turned it from a technical problem into a moral one. Second, you had real grassroots anger erupting. In the UK, people were literally staging sit-ins at Starbucks after finding out the company was paying almost no tax despite making massive sales. And third, that public anger finally boiled over into the halls of power. Suddenly, you had these dramatic, televised hearings where politicians were just grilling executives from places like Google, Amazon, and Starbucks, exposing this massive gap between what was legal and what the public felt was right.
And you could just feel the shift in the room. The entire tone had changed. For years, executives could just stand up and say, hey, what we're doing is perfectly legal, and that would be the end of the conversation. Not anymore. Now, that defense was met with pure hostility. This quote from a UK member of parliament just says it all: outrageous and unacceptable. Legality was no longer a shield. It just wasn't enough anymore.
All this public pressure, all this political heat, it forced governments to do something they hadn't done in almost 100 years. They had to go back to the drawing board and completely rewrite the entire global tax rulebook.
And the outcome of all that was this huge, coordinated global project known as BEPS. It stands for Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, which is a fancy way of saying its goal was actually really simple. Stop corporations from playing games where they shift all their profits to low-tax places and make them pay tax where they actually make their money. And maybe the most brilliant, game-changing tool to come out of this is the 15% global minimum tax. This whole thing is designed to stop what everyone called the race to the bottom, where countries kept cutting their tax rates to attract business. Here's how it works. Let's say a big company pays only 5% tax on its profits in country A. Well, now its home country, country B, can just step in and say, nope. They'll apply a 10% top-up tax on those same profits, and boom, the total tax paid is 15%. Just like that, the entire incentive to shift your profits to some tax haven, it just evaporates. It creates a global floor that you can't go below.
So where does this leave us? Well, it means we are living in a fundamentally new tax world. Seriously. The old game is over.
And this isn't just some high-level theoretical thing happening at the OECD. No, countries on the ground are getting aggressive. Take India, for example. The government there has literally shut down hundreds of thousands of companies they suspect are just empty shells. And the Prime Minister himself has called it a crusade against the looters of the nation's wealth. I mean, that's incredibly strong language.
This is the key takeaway. The goalposts have completely and permanently moved. For decades, the only question a tax advisor really had to answer was, is this legal? But now they have to ask a whole bunch of other, tougher questions. Does this have any real economic substance? Is there a genuine business purpose for doing this? And maybe the most important one, how is this going to look on the front page of a newspaper?
And that brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? That old, ancient idea of international tax as just a cost to be ruthlessly cut. It's been defeated, or at least seriously wounded. We're now trying to build a new system, one based not just on what's legal, but on what's fair. But that leaves us with a huge, final question for our globalized world. What does fairness actually look like? And who gets to decide?